Welcome to the lecture video on Newmont Mining and BHP Billiton. And what's great about these two cases is they provide such contrasting approaches to corporate social responsibility or how to do business globally that I think they provide some very instructive lessons for managers. And, of course, Newmont Mining is the company, the U.S. company that really ran into some serious troubles, right? Some serious problems in Peru. And BHP Billiton, on the other hand, was a company that actually was very effective and did a great job in some ways at handling the local community. And so I think that these two companies are very useful for that reason. So let's look at this a little bit more in detail. Some companies really still lack effective CSR strategies. And when you don't have an effective CSR strategy, you can get into a situation like this, where the local community may turn against the company, so much so that they'll be coming at you with torches and saying we won't allow you into our local community. And so this is an actual photograph of a local mining site in Peru where a company, actually this unfortunately was a company from China. Now Chinese companies are quickly adapting to the situation, are very quickly implementing good CSR strategies, but in this particular case, this company was not doing that, and you see the result. And so that is why this kind of thing is such an important thing. It's important not just to get the legal license to do business in a particular country, but to get the social license to operate as well, to win the support of the local community. Without that, you can end up with a situation like this, right? So in Newmont, as you look through this case, keep in mind these key discussion questions. What practices, right, did Newmont Mining follow in Peru that put it at risk, its ability to engage in mining operations in Peru completely? And we see what happened, right? When you don't follow good practices, you can really get yourself in trouble with the local community. In Newmont Mining case, who are the key stakeholders and what are their interests? This is simply the stakeholder analysis. I have mentioned this in other contexts, but stakeholder analysis, basically all it consists of identifying who would be affected by your company's practices and policies, and in what way would they be affected, and how can you address those concerns? So the bottom line in the stakeholder analysis is just to sit down with a whiteboard and just identify who is going to be affected, who in any way could be affected by what we're doing, and how can we address those concerns in advance, okay? So that's the stakeholder analysis. Now, in the Newmont Mining case, this is a situation where the company had hired a trucking company to transport mercury, and some other substances through the local community back, to some place where apparently it was going to dispose of it. But in any case, what happened is there was a spill. And so was Newmont responsible for that spill? Was the manager responsible in any way? Is it responsible for the trucking company it contracted to transport the mercury? What is Newmont's responsibility to the local community? Would taking responsibility for the local community conflict with Newmont executives' responsibility to the shareholders, right? Did they say, oh, we don't want to get involved now that they've been touching the mercury and people, have been picking it up and kids have been playing with it? Maybe we should just, pretend like it doesn't happen. Is that the best approach, or should you take some kind of responsibility? So I think there's some key lessons from this case. And so Newmont, as a result of its mishandling of the case, and the case makes very clear what happened, they did not warn the local community. They actually hired people to pick up the mercury by hand. They hired doctors that said, oh, there's no hazard here. And so clearly there were serious health problems that surfaced. It destroyed Newmont's reputation in that local community. They lost their social license, the approval of the local community to do business in that country, in that particular region. So this really affected their business. It had a very negative impact. And so if they had just taken more responsibility, if they had perhaps anticipated these things, they've done an adequate stakeholder analysis beforehand, and considered all the potential concerns or issues that could arise, they might have been able to avoid this kind of problem. So if you had been Newmont's CEO, what actions would you have taken before the fact, proactively, or after the fact? And again, here's another example. This is what happened, right? When Newmont Mining found itself in this kind of situation, the local community turned against them, turning against them. So this prevented them from expanding their mining operations in that region. Now, here's a completely different approach of BHP Billiton. And so how would you compare and contrast Newmont's approach to BHP Billiton's approach with this Tintaya dialogue? And I thought this was a very interesting example of what a completely different company did. This Australian company, BHP Billiton, very powerful, effective mining company. And, how do they deal with these kinds of things? And so in their case, they did a dialogue. They went out and asked the local community, what are your concerns? We want to put the mining operation here. Do we have any concerns that you can share with us now so we can anticipate these things? What are your needs? What are your concerns? How can we win your support? And so one of the things that turned out the local community needed was there wasn't any hospital there. So they didn't build a big, shiny, cancer unit. They built a hospital that could deal with the general issues of the local population. And this won them such support from the local community that when there were issues and some other people from other communities said, hey, we should kick out the mining company, people in that local community came to their defense. So I think this is a very different approach. And this is why these mining companies need to have an effective CSR strategy. Look at the kind of impact these mines have on the local region. I mean, this kind of deep pit mining is just devastating, can be devastating, right? And the kinds of chemicals involved, the mercury and things involved in the process. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Now, there's an optional video. You can look at that if you want. And that gives you some idea of how BHP Billiton used this dialogue process to try to prevent potential protests and problems. So I think there are some lessons for international managers from these two contrasting cases. I think it's worth to look at these cases. They aren't that long and relatively easy. You see the detrimental practices of Newmont, the poor transportation, they're trivializing the risks to the civilians, disregarding the religious concerns of a mountain that they wanted to mine. The local residents considered that a holy place, and Newmont was just going to go ahead and mine this place, painting the drinking water, and not really having done an adequate stakeholder analysis and anticipating potential problems and finding a way to deal with them beforehand. This would have been a very effective kind of stakeholder analysis that Newmont Mining could have done. Just kind of a basic thing, but to go beyond that would be to anticipate what kind of protest or concerns these stakeholders would have, and then how can we address those concerns. So in the case of Newmont, as I mentioned, they lost the social license to operate. But in the case of BHP Billiton, I think we see a much more proactive rather than reactive approach. Lengthy discussions, the dialogue process, as I mentioned, to try to address concerns or learn about concerns before they became a thing. And so the lessons about this is that it's crucial for companies. And again, some industries may be more affected by this than others. I think mining is one that is heavily affected by this. Thunderbird works very closely with a very great mining company called Freeport-McMoRan. It's just down the block from the graduate campus of Thunderbird in downtown Phoenix. And we have a close relationship with them. In fact, we provide a sort of a corporate social responsibility work for Freeport-McMoRan. And so we use our own kind of CSR arm of Thunderbird. It's called Thunderbird for Good. And we train women entrepreneurs in local communities where Freeport-McMoRan is doing its mining work. And so by that, Freeport-McMoRan builds great support from the local community, builds the local community, makes it a better place to live. And I think that Thunderbird has been involved in that, and we are very proud to be associated with a company like Freeport-McMoRan because they are very effective at this. They actually have sustainability managers, and really companies that are effective at this are good at this. So the dialogue process that BHP Billiton used is the very effective kind of process that companies that are doing this in a very professional way make use of. And I think that the case on BHP Billiton did a fantastic job of kind of laying out how that could work. And so that's something that could be applied not just to the mining industry, but to other scenarios. That would be a very effective way to kind of amplify or expand on, flesh out your stakeholder analysis, right? So these are the lessons of these two cases, and that I think will highlight the importance of an effective CSR strategy.